Justin Trudeau's cabinet loves monster donuts. Monster donuts. It reminds me of Lady Gaga's, like the title of her album. I think, wasn't it Monster as well? Monster donuts. Anyways, Luke is responding to Omar and his presentation of monster donuts. He says, this week's donuts adventure features fresh donuts from Donut Monster. Thank you, blah, blah, for a great Hamilton discovery. He's not making a discovery here. There's a whole bunch of history with monster donuts in this cabinet, and I'll show you in the next tab. But Luke says, the economy's a wreck. Transportation has been absolutely obliterated, and these two show off their $36 box of donuts. Bet you plebs wish you could afford these. Suck it, losers. So, right? I mean, it's insulting, right? And so somebody was asking, Viva Fry says, which internet sleuth is going to find the connection between Donut Monster and the Liberal Party? Because I strongly suspect one exists. And Andy Lee says, easy, Donut Monster gave out free donuts if you got vaccinated. We call this public health initiatives, and it's definitely not lobbying, right? And then she says, longtime favorite of Trudeau. So this is Graham McKay, and he says, the chai donut Justin Trudeau munched on during his Tuesday morning stop at Donut Monster. There's a picture of like a half-eaten donut, and my thing clicked it. Hold on. And Real Andy Lee says, they hosted vaccine clinics, wonder what the compensation was. So is it a super fan? Is it a person who makes donuts and really truly believes in the vaccine, and it just all happened to coincide with Omar finding out about Donut Monster, right? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a wrong-headed focus. We don't need to be focused on sugary treats across Canada, especially when the transport minister is failing pretty much. Via Rail, airport delays, the Mexico debacle, the SunQuest, not SunQuest. Was it SunQuest? I can't remember the name of the vacation thing over Christmas, but there's been lots of issues, and donuts ain't fixing it. Brian Lilly says, the old guard of the Ontario Liberal Party just told the four contenders for the party leadership that they want someone else from another party to be in charge. This is madness. So Robert says, some Ontario Liberal veterans have written an open letter to Ontario Green leader Mike Schreiner to ask him to cross the floor and run for the Liberal leadership. I mean, not that it's risky, because he'll probably win the Liberal leadership. It's that weak at this point in time. But it doesn't seem politically, well, I mean, maybe they're making a good case. I didn't read the letter because I don't really care that much. I'm not going to vote Liberal. I'm not interested in the pitch. I just think it's interesting that they're even making the overture, because I think that it's risky enough for Schreiner that it's a non-starter, right? And it just is insulting to the candidates who are running for Liberal leadership now. Lion Advocacy says, the federal government is now trying to dictate land use in Ontario on the basis of a novel legal ruse, a perfect example of how years of constitutional and charter overreach leads to ever-expanding power demands by the federal government. And so here's part of the Globe and Mail piece, and it's talking about Ford disappointed with the federal environment minister's Greenbelt comments. So Gelbo, who said Ottawa could try to block development that his province is set to allow on land it removed from its protected Greenbelt. And they're making the case, here's the relevant part from the Globe and Mail. It says, the environment minister warned he could use federal powers to protect at-risk species if future proposed developments on the former Greenbelt lands were shown to harm their habitats, as his government did in the case of a subdivision outside of Montreal. Quote, you can imagine that if similar projects were to be proposed on lands that were part of the Greenbelt, then I have a legislative obligation to intervene, Mr. Gelbo said, according to the online environment publication, The Narwhal. He also mentioned Ottawa's Impact Assessment Act, which is already being used to scrutinize Mr. Ford's Highway 413, a proposed expressway that would carve through the Greenbelt land. The minister said Ottawa, quote, will be looking at the potential use of federal tools to stop some of these projects. So even if you are elected and you are choosing to govern in a certain way using notwithstanding clause and all sorts of other legislative tools, etc., right or wrong, and sometimes I definitely think Ford has been wrong, if you try and move forward with a legislative whatever initiative, something that you want to complete, getting cut off by the federal government is what the notwithstanding clause was meant to circumvent, to protect against. So the federal government, if they did veer out of their lane, the province could say, nope, I don't think so. I don't care what you say. So I think that it's interesting that we're seeing Galbeau and other ministers become emboldened on healthcare and on other provincial folders, on other provincial files, to speak out and stop provinces from acting, again, outside of the jurisdiction of the federal government. And then they say, well, through this lens, I have jurisdiction. Through this lens, that's my land there. No, I don't think so, right? I don't think so. Scott Moe says, catch and release works well when you're fishing, but it doesn't work well when you're dealing with serious offenders. And this is Scott Moe wanting a bail reform style anything, right? And he's sharing a Western Standard News interview, so that's good. It's an interesting perspective. And I think that bail reform is necessary. We're seeing gun criminals being released on bail, and we're seeing people like Tamara Litch punished and languish in jail for long periods of time for no real reason. And there's still people in Coutts for the Coutts border blockade, etc. They're in jail, and there was a slow roll, and I'll show you that in a minute as well, to support them. But fundamentally, the justice system in our country is broken. I think the whole governance structure in our country is broken. The federal government is encroaching on provincial jurisdiction to push their ideology and hamstringing premiers to further push through their whatever they're trying to get through. And it doesn't stop at Doug Ford. Danielle Smith is dealing with similar issues. She's written to the federal government to call them out and say, listen, I know what you're doing, and stop it. And I don't know that it's going to be effective. We'll see, I guess. We'll see. Heather says, this is revisiting the convoy on the anniversary of the convoy. And she says, the road is closed to traffic, but no sitting in a chair allowed, no flags allowed in snowbanks, provoking peaceful people and creating conflict. So here's Alexandra Lavoie, and she's a rebel. She's a rebel reporter, I believe. And she says, policemen intervened to ask the demonstrators to get their chairs off the street. Meanwhile, more police officers ripped the flags off the snowbanks. The situation has escalated. So there were people there, and there's this rebel news video of the police officer asking people to move, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think there was a big flare up or anything like that. Here is out west, Without Papers Pizza. He says, to prevent the reunion convoy from driving by the correctional center where 4 men are being held as political prisoners for their involvement in the Coutts border blockade, the cops have barricaded the road that leads to the facility. So I just found it interesting, the nationwide coordinated response. Already, they don't want anybody doing any kind of convoys or anything like that. They're moving to stop it, and they're moving to stop it very obviously. And that's interesting to me. It's worth noting. The organization is concerning. It shows they're expecting pushback, et cetera, et cetera. There was probably less protests than what was projected and expected. But to me, it speaks to the way the government views the convoy and the citizens who are upset with lockdowns and the COVID response and the tone deafness and the complete deafness of the government to the public, what they want with regards to a whole bunch of different things. Healthcare funding, healthcare period, I think. Working healthcare would be good. Not having a system completely overwhelmed. Affordable groceries would be good. Affordable housing would be good. Where if you have a stable job, you're not priced out of the housing market before you even begin saving, because you do the simple math and you think to yourself, I can't save the down payment for a house. Never mind make the payments. I can't save for the down payment until 20 years. Like if I continue making what I make now, it's going to take me 20 years to save for the down payment. That's demoralizing. That's crazy. Right? That's wild. And it's just, and the inventory is very low. It's very difficult to buy in, right? Do you have $500,000 for your first house, $500,000? Or you're going to buy a condo, right? And then there's condo fees. So there's a lot to trade off there. If your mortgage is less, but the condo fee adds $300 or $400 to a monthly payment, is your mortgage really all that much less? Road to Serfdom says, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of communist propaganda was not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate, and therefore the less it corresponds to reality, the better. So I think that this is worth pointing out. Sometimes I lament and say, like, what they're reporting is conflicting. They said this, and then they said this. That's on purpose. They know they're doing it. It breeds confusion, and therefore that's what they want. The purpose of propaganda is to confuse and humiliate, and not to convey accurate, meaningful information. It's to keep people lost discussing the finer points of some off in the weeds topic that doesn't really matter, while the meat and potatoes gets, I don't know, handed out while everybody's talking about something else later, right? It's just crazy. It's crazy because they get cut out because they're focused on the wrong thing. The valuable pieces get portioned up and distributed, and you're cut out because you're not included. The Globe and Mail is reporting Moody's upgrades Alberta's long-term rating, but the UCP should still be cautious as election approaches. So Moody's upgrading the long-term rating is usually good news. It says that the premier is doing a good job and there's lots of jobs and so on and so forth. And so those indications are usually good to get before an election. But it's funny to me that the Globe and Mail is minimizing that. There's a full-on media war against Danielle Smith at this point in time, and Rachel Notley is leading it, and she's making statements that aren't true, and the CBC is reporting those statements, doubling down on those statements, re-reporting those statements when being called out by Danielle Smith. And I just find it interesting that in the context of that, we've got the Globe and Mail saying, oh yeah, but she should be really cautious. I don't know what the seats look like. I hear that the UCP has 5-point lead over the NDP, 46 to 41. That sounds like good news, but what do the seats look like? I fear that the dense city centers are going to do in Alberta what the Ontario and Quebec city centers do for the country, and make it go a different direction than what people actually want, just because of the number of seats in the small geographical area. So I'm concerned. I don't know what the seats are looking like. I think that the NDP is stronger than it looks, just because I watched Joe Biden win the presidency, and I've seen elections in modern Canada, and it doesn't surprise me when a party like the NDP wins, when it doesn't look like they're very, very popular, when it doesn't look like anybody supports them. They win. They win, and they win, and they win. It's ridiculous.